18 days into the US-Iran war, President Donald Trump faces a conflict that has proved far harder to control than the opening strike suggested, with no painless exit and only difficult choices ahead. In fact, many experts now outline several military and political options for Washington and at least 5 plausible ways in which this war could ultimately end. But first, let's update you on the most important developments so far in this US-Israel and Iran war. Well, the war began with the dramatic US-Israeli air campaign that killed Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei and many senior officials in strikes on Tehran on 28th of February. Iran's leadership, however, rapidly installed a successor and activated a decentralized mosaic defense doctrine designed precisely to keep its military functioning even after such a blow. And since then, Iran has used missiles and swarms of relatively cheap drones to hit multiple targets across Gulf and Israel while heavily restricting traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the result is a war that is already reshaping global energy markets and domestic politics in the United States. And this even before any clear endgame is in the sight. So today we will tell you what options Trump actually has in this war with Iran and how this confrontation could actually end. By day 18, the initial sense of US operational superiority has collided with the reality of a resilient adversary that prepared for precisely this kind of a war. Iran's forces, drawing on lessons from the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, have focused on survival, retaining enough retaliatory capacity to stay in the fight, and most importantly, prolonging the conflict to try to end it on their own terms. In fact, Tehran's strategy has had global consequences. Missiles and drones have threatened Gulf allies, air traffic has slowed, and oil and petrol prices have spiked, forcing fuel rationing in import-dependent states. Also, many nations have released hundreds of millions of barrels from strategic reserves to cushion the shock. But shipping insurance costs and disrupted trade routes continue to trickle through sectors from tea exports in Kenya to manufacturing in Europe and Asia. Regionally too, the conflict has widened beyond Iran's border, with Hezbollah trading fire with Israel and Iranian-aligned groups menacing ships in both the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea. Although at the same time, Iran's domestic position is also fragile. Sanctions, wartime damage, and earlier mass protests have left the economy under extreme strain, prompting some analysts to describe the risk of Iran evolving into a ghost state that maintains a security apparatus but struggles to fund basic governance. Now, Trump began the campaign demanding Iran's unconditional surrender, but the combination of Iranian resilience, global economic disruption, and domestic political pressure has narrowed Trump's room for maneuver. Now, many believe the war is depleting expensive US missile defense interceptors, while higher fuel prices risk angering price-sensitive voters ahead of congressional elections, prompting anxious calls from multiple Republican lawmakers who fear losing their seats. Now, analysts say one option is to revive the definition of victory, abandon talks of surrender, claim success in killing Khamenei and degrading Iran's military, and urge Iranians to change their own government over time. However, Iran may not offer a clean off-ramp. It could continue low-level hostilities against US allies and shippings, even if Washington scales back airstrikes, leaving Trump facing a messy, unfinished conflict. Another path is escalation, sending special forces or even limited ground units into Iran for raid on missile sites or nuclear assets, or arming Iranian opposition groups so that the war is effectively outsourced into internal ethnic and political conflict. Military experts warn this could deepen the war, entangle the US in a long occupation or proxy struggle, and increase the risk of Iran's fragmentation rather than a neat regime collapse. Now, a third broader option is to accept a drawn-out war of attrition, relying on superior firepower and sanctions to grind down Iran while trying to manage the economic fallout at home and abroad. Well, that course, however, would sit uneasily with Trump's repeated promises to avoid forever wars and could erode support among allies and markets if no political solution emerges. Now, experts surveyed by the Financial Times outline at least 5 distinct scenarios for how this war might conclude, each with different risks for Trump, Iran, and the wider region. Well, the first one is that Trump declares an early victory. Well, under this scenario, mounting economic damage and political pressure in Washington pushed Trump to announce that US objectives have been met and to wind down operations, regardless of Iran's formal stance. He could argue that Iran's nuclear and missile program have been set back and its regional networks weakened, even if Tehran's leadership and core military infrastructure survive. Although the risk is that Iran emerges embittered but intact, still able to threaten Gulf allies and shipping lanes, leaving a less stable region after a short war. Now, another scenario mirrors earlier US campaign in Venezuela: eliminate or sideline top leaders and hope a more cooperative figure emerges from within the system. But Iranian experts believe that a succession plan was in place before Khamenei's death, and the system has largely closed ranks, making it difficult to find a powerful insider willing to pivot sharply towards Washington. And even if the Islamic Republic formally falls, power could simply reconsolidate in the hands of security elites such as IRGC, changing the facade more than the underlying regime. Well, third outcome is a grinding stalemate. In this outcome, Iran continues to observe strikes while striking back asymmetrically with drone, missiles, and threaten to the Strait of Hormuz. And the US continues air and naval operations without committing to a large-scale ground war. Neither side achieves decisive victory, but both incur mounting economic and political cost until exhaustion or outside mediation produce a ceasefire short of either side's maximal goals. And interestingly, historical precedents like Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan underscores how military superior powers can still choose to withdraw from protracted conflicts when the political price becomes too high. Well, in the fourth scenario, the Iranian state survives but severely degraded, similar to Saddam Hussein's Iraq after years of sanctions and war. Tehran might lose much of its ability to arm and guide regional proxies such as Hezbollah's and Houthis, yet retain enough capability to maintain control at home. Well, analysts warn that in such a case, Iran could remain isolated but still capable of harassing Western interests, for example, by targeting ships near Hormuz whenever it seeks leverage. Now comes the most dangerous scenario, which involves the collapse of effective central authority, with Iran's diverse ethnic regions sliding into conflict backed by external powers. If Tehran's core institutions, including the Revolutionary Guard Corps, were to disintegrate under the pressure of war, sanctions, and internal unrest, local warlords and militias could carve out their own territories, echoing the chaos in Iraq and Afghanistan after the regime collapsed. Well, such a fragmentation would likely prolong violence for years, send new refugee flows across the region, and most dangerously, keep global energy markets on edge due to constant insecurity around Iran's coast and borders. Well, 18 days in, none of these 5 outcomes is predetermined, and more than one could unfold in sequence as the conflict evolves. But for now, as missiles continue to fall and tankers thread their way through the contested waters, Trump's decisions in the coming days will shape not only his political fate, but also which of these endgames moves from scenario to reality.